Projects don't fall apart because the work is too hard. They fall apart because the process around the work is unclear. The entire workflow is reactive, stressful, and completely unpredictable. But high-performing agencies don't rely on talent alone to stay organized. They rely on a simple project blueprint that keeps every team member aligned, every detail clear, and every step flowing in the right order without needing you to micromanage every detail. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the project blueprint that keeps creative agencies on track, reduces revisions, speeds up your delivery, and makes clients feel like your process is actually really rock solid. And if you've watched the earlier videos in this series, this will complete the entire system for you. But even on its own, this blueprint will immediately make your projects run smoother. Let's jump in. So first, let's just define what project management is. So objectively, project management is meant to make sure that the right people have the right information at the right time with clarity as to what exactly they need to do to allow for things to function appropriately, right? Because there's cascading oriented deliverables. There's, strategy is going to impact design and they have to ladder over each other and have some semblance of even potentially working directly side by side or parallel to each other throughout one or two phases of the project, maybe even beyond that. But the reality is how do you have the right butt in the right seat at the right moment with the right information? That's effectively what project management is. And so just making sure that the work is sequencing correctly, keeping everyone aligned and preventing communication issues and confusion. Ultimately, they're also responsible for a lot of the P&L responsibility of a project. So making sure that ultimately we are able to have the reporting that projects are being done not only on deadline, but also on budget objectively as well. So that the client is getting the work that they want at the timeline that they need, communicating with the client and making sure that we are receiving information and ultimately making sure that the client gets the deliverable on time. Then let's look at the kind of several phases of a project. The first phase of which is the launch. And so many agencies miss this very vital phase, or if they do it kind of in a gloss over it version and don't get into the depths of it. So here's a couple of things that are very vital. So first, you need to define a couple of things. You need to define goals. You need to identify the stakeholders, both on the internal agency side as well as at the client. You need to be able to understand and map kind of the constraints around the project. So what does that look like from a budgetary perspective, a timeline perspective, a creative perspective, all of those pieces. Review the scope so that it's clear what's in scope and what's not. Identify any risks with the specific personality type of the client and make sure that there's 100% clarity on the brief at this point. You may not have the big idea already done, but you have skeleton version of the brief at this point, right? The project brief and account brief. Now, here's the thing that I see that's missed in an opportunity, very simple thing that can be done that is a missed opportunity. So first off, the brief, scope of work, sales recordings should be delivered to the team in advance of the kickoff for you, making sure that they are able to download the information. It is vital to understand that the team actually fully is able to understand exactly what's going on, right? So before you go into the internal and client kickoff, the team has had an opportunity to download the information, come to that internal kickoff meeting with questions, informed understanding. Because the reality of how I see the world, at least, is that so many projects are started with a lot of time in the client development phase of it, understanding the client, understanding their needs, understanding all these pieces, and then we try to launch it to the team without an understanding whether that's coming from the account manager or coming from the sales team. The reality is that the team needs to have a moment to be able to download the information and get themselves into the right space. The weeks that you spend speaking with the client to get this SOW signed, the team needs to try to get at least reasonably up to speed with you. Now we're getting into the planning phase. So timeline establishment, understanding who's going to own each different phase of the project, identifying which resources and putting into your resource plan, understanding which touch points and so when creative reviews are going to actually happen, then that communication rhythm that's going to be necessary. So each project, largely because of the client stakeholders, the internal stakeholders, and the way that we end up just communicating between each other internally, it's vital that we have an understanding of what points throughout this project are we going to be regrouping, are we going to be meeting, is this going to be necessary, are we doing it in design reviews, are we doing it in revision phases, exactly how are we going about this, and largely based on the deliverables that you're doing, you should have a clear understanding yourself of when you're doing this typically within a project. Now there's a little variation and nuance depending on the client and how they like to communicate and the amount of availability that this specific person has, that you have to make slight adaptations to the client communication component, but you should have clarity in a system around a process defined of how it is that you go about your internal communication standpoints and when you actually typically go through the creative reviews or the internal touch points. Now we're getting into execution. So your team is now fully beginning the work at this point. Tasks have been assigned in project management. We have clear deadlines and due dates on every single task that are in that cascading order. You have the creative production fully is now starting at this point, right? So now the thing that I'd like you to think about when it comes to the creative production piece that's really vital, and it touches on the prior statement that I was making of like, what are the internal touch points? But again, I like to see reviews happen creatively a little bit more truncated at the beginning of the project, again, sort of midway through, and then a little bit more again at the end, but usually around 60-ish% are happening in that first 30%. So 60% of the total design review time is invested at the beginning of the project, because the brief needs to be very clear. We need to be able to meet with the creative team to make sure that they understand exactly what they're doing, that strategy time that's going to be going into it, making sure that we have that clarity of when those touch points are actually happening. And largely, the more investment that you make from a creative direction perspective, that creative feedback is going to actually make the project work a lot more smoothly. And then understand, what is that regular client communication? So are we communicating with them frequently? Are we communicating with them weekly? Are we communicating with them at each different phase of the project? What does that actually look like? And I'm going to err on the side of a little bit more communication than less, especially if this is a new client and you don't have a relationship with them. The reality is that they feel a bit nervous at this point in the relationship. Does the agency understand us? Are they able to do this work? Kind of where are they? You don't want them to feel a bit lost in this project. You want them to feel like they have clarity as to what's going on. Now we're getting into that monitoring and making sure that things are not going off the rails. So the way that I like to look at this is that project management should be looking in your project management tool to see what kind of progress is being made. What tasks have changed in status? Have they been marked complete? Are they currently being worked on? Checking with the team members to make sure that they're making progress, that, hey, if something is due tomorrow from them, making sure that you're checking in with them to make sure that they're going to get it complete by that point, because otherwise it can cause delays throughout the actual project. And then they should be doing weekly reporting. So how many hours do we have allocated for this phase or for the entire project? How far through the project are we from a deliverable perspective? Are we gearing towards going over? Are we coming in under right now based on the amount of hours that we've already spent? Being clear in how the project is actually performing. Objectively trying to spot delays and try to remove them as early as possible, whether that's a client blocker, that they're going to be out of office, or that there's additional stakeholder issues. Maybe making sure that each different phase of the project, we now have the stakeholder on the client side meetings pre-booked for the entirety of the rest of the project. Making sure that we are informing the client of any consequences of them delaying feedback, not getting back to us, delaying meetings, whether that's a penalty and costs, or whether that means that the project is going to be delayed, probably both. Making sure that the client has an understanding of what they are doing and how they're engaging with you is actually going to have an impact to them. There shouldn't be any surprises on the client or for the client at this type of thing. And then finally getting to wrapping the project. So final delivery of work, getting the client approval, and then we do a couple of pieces. So we're going to have the internal debrief or postmortem. So you're going to have talked about client goals. Did we accomplish them? If not, where did we fall short? Agency goals. Did we accomplish them? Where did we fall short? So kind of what worked and what didn't throughout the project. Is this project a case study project? Is this an award-worthy piece of work that we should be considering setting up for awards? What are additional challenges that the client is currently facing? So throughout the actual scope of work and delivery, there's a likelihood that the client communicated about other issues going on within the organization that is going to define additional opportunities that we may be able to help the client with, and then reviewing the client postmortem or the client sunset meeting, project wrap conversation, reviewing that agenda to make sure that we are clear as to where we are going to go next, and then having that client upsell or sunset meeting ultimately. So it's a project wrap meeting according to the client. We're just going to debrief on everything, make sure that you have everything you need, but you're going to actually talk about what went well in the project, what didn't, what opportunities are there still for them to get to that next phase of growth of what they're looking to accomplish, ultimately objectively looking to be able to upsell. And then finally being able to take from both the client conversation and the internal postmortem and update your infrastructure, your SOPs, if this was an opportunity to do so. And so the reality of what creates for communication and prevents for issues and things kind of going off track is having one source of truth throughout the actual project. Project management, generally speaking, should be this. I've seen agencies use a plethora of different things, from the communication center being both in Slack and project management, that just creates a lot of confusion. And then ultimately some people got the information and then some of them didn't. And then people are having to search to try to find client feedback or when we spoke about this and where this information is. And it creates for a lot of wasted time and effort. Making sure that the entire team has aligned expectations of what does complete look like, what was the client looking for, what are we looking for, and making sure that we're checking in frequently and early enough so we are not looking to try to recoup things that have ultimately already gone off the rails. So it's incredibly important that we realize all of these different pieces throughout the project and how it is that we are going about it, and making sure that it allows for us to be really clean and clear. Now, the thing that allows for revisions to be reduced quite dramatically is making sure that we are communicating things in a really meaningful way. And so it's really important because revisions can throw projects off quite a lot. The reality of why I see this actually happening most often is the way that the work is being presented. And that's a separate video of getting into exactly how to go through the different stages of creative review. But I just want to point out that if the way that you're presenting the client work, the creative work, the strategy work, whatever, and your ask of them is, well, what do you think? It's going to result in revisions. You need to be actually allowing for them to understand the entire cycle of the work that you've done, the considerations that you've had, the nuances that go through the project, where are we in the project. Ultimately, they need to understand why this was the best choice for them and why you're giving them this recommendation, because you didn't just give one idea and then put it out in front of them likely. And the reality is that you need to have them understand the full thinking that goes into it. And then finally, the thing that is vital is that you want to turn this into a reusable template. So as you're going through in the first project that you're doing this, you're really refining the step that you're taking. You're going to allow for this to be able to create a template for it. So if you're project management tool, you should be able to create a template, copy and paste a project of the stakeholders, the roles, the people, the timeline that things typically take. And then you just need to slightly augment it, allowing for you to be able to adjust it to this new scope of work. And objectively, one of the things, and this doesn't have to be in V1 of it, but link to relevant SOPs and systems within the actual task of the project. So is there a template that we follow for this specific type of work with Figma? Is there a folder structure that we follow? How do we actually go about doing each one of these different steps? Is there client check-in meetings? Are there Calendly links? Like all those pieces that you need for the team to be able to just quickly action things so they don't have to be fumbling around for things. If you take a more pragmatic approach to the way that you set up this template, it'll make things go a lot more smoothly. Now you've got the blueprint that keeps your projects organized, but a good blueprint can only take you so far if the infrastructure behind it isn't strong enough to support it, because unpredictable delivery doesn't come from poor planning. It comes from weak systems, unclear handoffs, no workflow backbone, bottlenecks, and a team that is constantly having to chase information. If you've already watched the delivery infrastructure video, you'll see exactly how this blueprint fits into the bigger operating system that makes sustainable growth possible. And if you haven't watched it yet, now's the perfect time. It will show you how top agencies structure their entire delivery pipeline so projects move more smoothly from start to finish.